Good morning, everyone. My name is Marcia, and I'm just going to hang out for a second here while all the participants come in to the webinar. Okay, it seems like we're leveling off here in terms of people coming on to the webinar. So hi, everyone. Again, my name is Marcia Nudland. I'm one of the organizers for the Middle Neighborhoods Community of Practice, and I'm the moderator for today's session, Updating Middle Neighborhood Housing Stock to Appeal to Today's home buyers. We said homeowners, but we do that sometimes too, don't we? And this is part one. We are going to do a part two in December that is about financing strategies, but today's webinar is going to focus on acquisition, rehab, resale strategies and how two experts do it, what they've learned about it over the years, and how they've used it to stabilize the market in middle neighborhoods in their communities. Go ahead and click forward, Anne. So I just have a few opening slides to, sort of brief everyone in middle neighborhoods in general. The Middle Neighborhoods Initiative is a national one. It's focused on mobilizing attention to reverse the trend of decline in middle neighborhoods. We'll talk about the characteristics of those in a minute. The national initiative does this through research, policy analysis, communications, and advocacy. And then there's also a community of practice that does that, works on connecting practitioners around the country. The national initiative is coordinated by the National Community Stabilization Trust, which many of you may work with. And it's advised by a steering committee of 20 people who are a mix of researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. I think our next slide is about the community of practice. So this is an informal facilitated network of over 300 practitioners, primarily with some researchers and policymakers joining us. We're all focused in some way on revitalizing middle neighborhoods. And we, connect with each other through webinars like this one. I do a lot of referrals. So I'm saying that because I invite you to, if you would like a referral to someone who's working on a similar topic as you or want to know more about something, I do a lot of that. Site visits, they're virtual right now, but we can organize site visits from one community to the next. Lots of phone calls. And, before COVID, we had annual convenings. So we may be starting that up again this year or in 2021 with a virtual convening. We're still thinking about that. And the work of the community of practice is supported by NeighborWorks America. And the small team of organizers includes me and also Ann DePetta, who's online supporting us, and Sheila Squire. So we always encourage everyone to join the community of practice by going to our website, middleneighborhoods.org. And at the bottom of every page, you can find a little place where you can join us, either our mailing list just for our newsletter, or also you can opt in on the community of practice. Okay, next slide. So if you haven't taken our Middle Neighborhoods 101 before, I just am going to cover the two slides that sort of talk about the characteristics of middle neighborhoods. And by the way, if you have any other people you'd like to learn more about middle neighborhoods, we do tend to offer Middle Neighborhoods 101 every single month, either the same day or the day before, nearby our main webinar. So although we haven't come up with a set of absolute definite hard numbers to describe middle neighborhoods, we are in pretty pretty significant agreement about their characteristics. So we're talking about neighborhoods that are mostly single family housing, and they were mostly built for families with children, which is why one of the reasons why they're vulnerable now, since that demographic has been declining for a long time. They tend to still be well more than 50% owner occupied. So these, you have that leverage point, but if you track their long-term trend, you can see that that's slowly eroding. The housing stock is in pretty good shape, but it's aging, and it often is out of step with what today's home buyers want, which has a lot to do with what this webinar today and what our panelists are going to talk about. Property values, depending on what city we're talking about or metro area, we may find that they're just in a very slow decline, or maybe they're just flat, or maybe their values do increase every year, but they do so in a way that's underperforming against the city that they're in, or underperforming against inflation, which has long-term consequences for the fiscal health of cities. Most of our members don't see, actually, whoops, let's see, can you go back a slide? Yeah, usually gentrification is not the primary concern in the middle neighborhoods that our current COP members are working in. That's in part because I think most of our membership started in the Northeast, where there are a lot of Rust Belt cities, and so they just weren't strong markets to begin with. But we are starting to see, as our membership starts to spread through the South and the West, that we do have more members where they're balancing both trying to reposition the neighborhoods for the next generations of home buyers without tipping that neighborhood over into hyperinflation. And one of the really key things about middle neighborhoods is that they tend to be more racially and ethnically diverse than either very low income neighborhoods or very high income neighborhoods, which we think is a wonderful value to our cities. And it's also a place where people are doing the American dream. They've bought a home, they're trying to accumulate some household wealth that perhaps can become intergenerational wealth, all things that we want to protect. Okay, Anne. And why we're concerned about middle neighborhoods is that we see them faltering in their sustainability. And by that, I mean their ability to reliably attract replacement owner occupants. Used to be they could be on autopilot, and you pretty much knew that if Mrs. Smith moved to Florida or went to a nursing home, there'd be another owner occupant buyer ready to take on that property. And you can't count on that necessarily anymore. Faltering in their ability to generate home values that will actually support quality maintenance, repairs, and updates without having big appraisal gaps. Another thing that our panelists will talk about today. Faltering in their ability to repel the worst investors. I think that speaks for itself. And then maintaining engaged residents who are taking stewardship of the neighborhood. As the homeownership rates decline and the turnover in the neighborhood increases, of course, that makes it harder to maintain that kind of leadership network that keeps an eye on things and nips problems in the bud. And finally, this whole issue about, are these still places that can deliver home equity to owners? And increasingly, that's less reliable. It's also less reliable that they will deliver ongoing revenue to municipal governments. So that's what we're dealing with. So let's talk about our panelists and what we're going to do today. Oh, I wanted to mention we have just launched a new tool that NCST developed, which is a free mapping tool. If you want to take a look in your city and just sort of apply a few different tests to see, depending on how you define it, what the middle neighborhoods are in your city. On the left-hand side there, you can click on several different tests. Income ranges, they're all income ranges, but they could be based on AMI of the city, of the MSA, or national. And then you can choose to look at, I think it's 2010. Oh, I see they've changed the dates a little. So there's a very recent set of, a recent year and then a few years before that. We have find that a lot of our members are working in neighborhoods that perhaps aren't really middle neighborhoods now, but they were not that long ago, and they're trying to restore them to that status. So take a look at that. So today's agenda, we're doing the welcome and introductions now, and we have two really outstanding organizations represented on our panel today. Probably most of you know of them. Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership, Inc. is in Atlanta, and it does an extraordinary amount of development and in the single family arena, mainly in my experience, and has just really updated a lot of housing stock, works with neighbors, takes on policy issues, was really involved in the, sort of trying to intervene in the foreclosure crisis, which felt very strongly in Atlanta and continues to be a problem. Home headquarters is in Syracuse, New York. Home headquarters is an absolute star nationally in so many arenas. They are a CDFI and they do an extraordinary amount of lending. And they also do redevelopment in neighborhoods of particular properties. They have great planning expertise. And they are working, I should point out, we have two different kind of market types here, regional markets. Atlanta is Atlanta, of course. So although it certainly has differences in pockets around the city and the MSA, which Jay will talk about, it's generally a pretty strong market. Home headquarters is in Syracuse, which is a much improved market than it used to be, but it has been one of those very hard hit upstate New York markets. And then we'll do some Q&A at the end, and then we'll close. So our two presenters, Jay Perlmutter is the Director of Single Family Development for Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership, ANDP. And Carrie Quaglia is the CEO of Home Headquarters in Syracuse, New York. And I'm so grateful to have both of them here. And I think we're going to start with Jay.
Thank you, Marcia. It's great to be here. And again, my name is Jay Perlmutter, and I'm with Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership. And we're excited to share some of what we've learned in Atlanta from our recent development in what we consider a middle neighborhood here. Let's see if I've got the slides. So we were formed in 1991 with the mission of promoting and creating mixed income or communities, or really advocating for affordable housing. Our history started ahead of the Olympics that came to Atlanta in '96, but we've expanded since then and worked throughout the metropolitan Atlanta region. We engage in four main sort of business lines right now: advocacy and community engagement. We're a CDFI lender. We provide down payment assistance to both our buyers as well as others as a member of the Federal Home Loan Bank. And the reason that we're here today is our development of affordable housing. Since 2008, we've developed nearly 700 homes, and we currently have 6 multifamily properties. Our single family housing development is probably our largest group and our largest sort of volume of transactions, although it's probably one of the more tricky ones, as many on this call would know. We are focused really on a scattered site model. We're not limited to one neighborhood or one geography. In the sort of metro Atlanta area, at the middle of the map there is downtown Atlanta, and you can kind of see that we stretch probably 30 miles in any direction. And our original funding came from a mix of neighborhood stabilization program dollars as well as the home program, and we've expanded since then. We do target our buyers to 120% of AMI and below, with special focus on buyers that are veterans or below 80%. What we started doing, though, is the neighborhood stabilization program and the home program, well, the neighborhood stabilization program sunsetted, is that we said we needed to find a way to continue to create new opportunities for home buyers in the metro Atlanta region and to further our impact. And so we developed what we call the private partner model, which basically allows us to partner with for-profit contractors, many of whom are real estate agents. And those partnerships allow us to really leverage their expertise and their boots on the ground. ANDP is the owner of all the properties, we're the funder. And in return, the for-profit partner is the sort of labor in the field. They're the eyes and ears, they're the hammer that's swinging for us. These strategic partnerships allow us to sort of diversify without scaling up our staff. We share risk and reward with those partners. And we've been able to grow that. And most of our more recent funding has come through sort of new market tax credits, capital magnet fund, and sort of other treasury programs that are a little bit more nimble and flexible. But just to give you a sense of our scale, over the last 5 years, we've more than doubled our production from 55 homes a year to now over 120 this past fiscal year. And we've done that with only one additional staff member, which is no easy feat, as anybody that works for single family knows. But as you can see here, our biggest group of production is in that private partner model. We've really been able to scale up with that production. So that's not why we're here. We are here to talk more about middle neighborhoods. So I just wanted to set the stage on ANDP. One of our two main in-town counties in Metro Atlanta is DeKalb County. Its population is diverse. You know, it stretches from the north end of our loop highway 285 all the way down to almost the airport. And so it's a very large county, very diverse. That map that we had before, you know, stretches a large chunk of it through DeKalb. You know, within DeKalb County, we started, sorry about that. We started looking in 2017 at the lingering effects of the foreclosure crisis from 2008. We found that in 2017, the South DeKalb, the sort of darker orange and brown colors at the bottom of the map, we're still seeing lingering effects from it of negative equity and stark contrast to sort of the more affluent northern part of the DeKalb area, and even in contrast to the larger part of Georgia. And there is a huge overlap there with, of course, the sort of African-American communities that are predominant in this part of DeKalb, as well as some of the mortgage fraud and foreclosure crisis issues. So we said, well, how can we help with this? And that's where we came up with our idea of a Home South DeKalb, or sort of a large place-based initiative. And again, while this is a large footprint, I would argue that most of this orange area is what we would call a middle neighborhood. A lot of this housing stock was built somewhere between the 50s and 80s, which for Atlanta is on the older side. And, you know, we'll talk in a minute about what we're seeing there, but, you know, the homes really were stable, you know, for a long time, but it's become more ripe for institutional investors coming in to buy them up for rentals, a little bit harder to kind of track the capital needed to make those upgrades. So our Home South DeKalb initiative was our plan on how can we help spur an investment in the south part of DeKalb County. And our goal was over a 3-year period to renovate 100 homes that would help spur investment using green and healthy standards. We also had some goals around our lending institution, as well as ways that we could partner with other community actors to support this part of DeKalb and create new investment. A couple of houses I wanted to share with you just to give you an example of what we're doing and what we're seeing and what the challenges have been with middle neighborhoods. This first house was 830 Churchill Court. This is an example of one that went well. We were able to buy this as a foreclosure from Fannie Mae. from National Community Stabilization Trust. We were able to get it at a discount of $88,000. The larger home did need a lot of work, $44,000, but it was still floor plan worked. It just needed a lot of cosmetic updates. It was 30 years old and really needed a big upgrade. And some of the things are, of course, items that are hard to monetize when you're talking to buyers, right? I mean, new driveways, upgrading the HVAC. I mean, those are only going to get you so far with buyers, but we did, upgrade the kitchen, as you can see in those bottom photos, to give it a little bit more pop and kind of bring it current with the market today. This one we did well. We came out ahead. We were able to kind of sell it for a little more than we had in it, and that was a good win. But in middle neighborhoods, we've also found that sometimes the reverse can be true. And so on Sterling Ridge, and I'm sorry, Marcia, I saw someone did raise a hand. I don't know. We're going to do Q&A after?
Yeah, we're going to do Q&A after. And
Okay.
So Sherry, if you want to type your question into either the Q&A box or the chat box, we'll make sure and come back to it.
And on Sterling Ridge, this is one where we tackled it, and it definitely got the best of us, but we're proud of what happened all the same. So this house was bought from a wholesaler, and I don't know if people are seeing these in other markets, but as an acquisition source in Atlanta, we've seen a huge rise in sort of these wholesalers or companies that are really just mining the streets. They're the We Buy Ugly Houses and the signboards on vacant homes or on telephone poles, and they have a place in the food chain, but it does raise the acquisition price, and that can be concerning. And so in this case, we paid $124,000 for this home. I couldn't find great before pictures, but I think you can imagine that in the lower picture, we've opened up the floor plan from the living room into the kitchen, and you can imagine that there was a wall there, and this was 3 distinct rooms between the kitchen, the dining room, and the living room, which is not a marketable function today. So we opened that wall up. We did put new kitchen in, new appliances, and one thing that may be hard to see from this picture and the scale is that it can be really tricky to manage the fact of way things were built 30, 40 years ago. So this kitchen's actually a little bit too narrow and probably did not have a dishwasher originally. And so the dishwasher, when opened, hits the oven door when opened, and you're sort of sandwiched between that and the sink. And so, that's a tricky one to fix when you're trying to spend, not take this all the way down to the studs. So, so not a good win, probably a little bit of a loss here, but was a great home buyer, or is a great home buyer for the neighborhood, is a great comp. We do think it's a good opportunity. So one second. Then, so in summary, what I would say, and I'm going to let Carrie pick up in a second. There it goes. What we have found is some of the best things that we've, the struggle we have is we need to create an upgraded home that can really help push value, one that'll also attract buyers. And so the items that most attract buyers are, of course, kitchens. Everyone wants an upgraded kitchen. We've been able to sometimes keep cabinets where budgets don't allow, but even putting in a new countertop, a hardstone countertop, whether it's quartz or granite, will give it a little pop. Of course, appliances. Our biggest bang for the buck has been around those functional obsolete sort of floor plans. So trying to really open up the floor plan between the kitchen and the living room and the dining room and create more of an open space. The other tougher item to fix, budgetary budget-wise is, a lot of these homes in the 60s only had one bath, or we have a lot of half baths in the master from the 60s. So how do you sort of create a full second bath, or at least a half bath somewhere? And if you're in Atlanta is a smaller home, 1,000, 1,200, 1,400 square feet, how do you sort of manage that add-on without expanding the footprint of the house, which does add a lot of expense? But so we found sometimes in some parts of Atlanta, we're actually better off having a two bath house that's a little bit more up to date and a little bit larger than leaving it as an existing 3-1. A couple small items just to throw in that I don't think add a lot of expense, but have been huge, is an accent light feature. So that middle picture here, our guys are really good. They'll find from the clearance racks, or they have discount websites. They'll pick up these kind of funky chandeliers, or maybe a pendant light, or something for the kitchen dining room area, or maybe something in the bathroom, like master. It just gives it that little bit of pop, a little bit of sizzle. This one has a barn door over the laundry room. So those are just some small, not too expensive ways that we've been able to sometimes just generate a little bit of high marketing touch, if you will. And the last thing I would sort of close with is a lot of our homes are smaller. And so one of the best ways, and it's not been very expensive, that we've been able to deal with sort of smaller rooms is using this sort of virtual staging. So that picture at the bottom is actually not a staged room, but for a couple $100 a room, we've been able to get a company to just drop into the photo, beds, furnitures, and it's all scaled. And I think it really does a lot on the listing to kind of sell the home. So I'll leave it there for now and turn it over to Carrie.
Well, thank you, Jay. Even though we're probably about 1,000 miles apart, I think we've got a lot of the same challenges. Interesting, as I was talking to Marcia about this issue of middle neighborhoods, some of the nomenclature is a little bit different. In this community, we don't really refer to them as middle neighborhoods so much. I think our community sort of uses more of the HUD definition of neighborhoods, and they divide neighborhoods really into 3 categories: revitalization areas that are that have significant disinvestment, transitional neighborhoods, and then stable neighborhoods. And obviously, being a private not-for-profit, most of our work is in those transitional neighborhoods, which I think Marcia would call the middle neighborhoods. But I think we're pretty much talking about the same thing, even though the nomenclature is just a little bit different. So we can advance just a couple of words about Home Headquarters. We have been around for about 25 years. We're a private not-for-profit. We are a CDFI. And really, we have 3 lines of business here. We do home buyer education. As a CDFI, the preponderance of our activity is in community development lending. And then we do a fair amount of property redevelopment that we're going to be talking a lot about today. In our history, we've redeveloped more than 800 formerly vacant properties. We're a top lender for investor financing in the city of Syracuse, the #1 residential home improvement lender in the city of Syracuse. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, that not only with property redevelopment, but also with your lending activity, you can make quite a difference in these transitional or middle neighborhoods. And then one thing that we did, about 10 years ago, is we formed our own affiliate that is a real estate brokerage. It's called CNY Affordable Realty. And we found that step was really critical to getting these properties marketed properly and sold. It seemed like for years, our own staff was selling the houses and we were paying other people commission. So we decided to end that nonsense and form our own realty, and that's been great. So how do we go about improving middle neighborhoods? We can move on. And really, as I said, we kind have two approaches, real estate development, which is acquisition and rehab of the existing housing stock, and we'll get into that. And then also through our financing mechanisms, where we'll provide financing to existing owners who wish to improve or modernize their homes. And there's sort of a part B to that as well, is that often as we do the real estate development, because sometimes we're exceeding the appraised value of the property, we will also finance the acquisition for the new home buyer. Interestingly, we are a CDFI, but since we're not a bank or a credit union, we're considered an quote unregulated CDFI. Now, if you were to ask my accounting staff or my planning staff about the word unregulated, it seems like everybody's here monitoring us constantly. So they would probably take exception with being unregulated. But what that unregulated means is we don't have to follow the same rules as a bank or a credit union would, specifically when it comes to things like appraised value. So moving on and concentrating then on our real estate development, we talked about those distressed neighborhoods, and property selection is critical. What we have been purchasing a lot of what we call private distressed properties. You might have a property where somebody passed away and the estate is selling the property, and it's in one of those neighborhoods. And frankly, if we don't get a hold of it and try to rehab it, it could sort of fall into the wrong hands and be really a bad thing for that whole block or neighborhood. We have also found pretty good success using NCST properties, which we find to be in a little bit better shape in our market, at least. And what we try to avoid are those severely distressed properties. As an example, we have a land bank that has maybe 600 or 700 vacant homes. And this was an example of a property that we purchased from the land bank. And in the surface, it didn't look too terrible. But then as we started doing the rehab, you see all the mold that was growing on all of the inside of the clapboard. So the only option for this house was to tear it down and build a new one. So we try to avoid that because you can't have too many losers, as Jay mentioned. And we try to get more of the properties where we can make a difference. So every week, every Tuesday morning, we have a weekly real estate meeting, and everybody comes to the table. So we go over the pipeline of activity and properties that we have. We take a good hard look at the needs of those properties, and you kind of divide it into two categories. So obviously the people that write the specs and do the work scopes, they're talking about the roof, the windows, the electrical, the plumbing. We know we have to do all of those things. But then we also have our licensed realtors in the room who are talking about how we're going to get this property sold, and particularly sold for the value that we need to sell it after rehab. And invariably, they're talking about things like modernizing kitchens and baths, in many cases adding a half bath or a full bath. I think Jay made mention to that. Changing the floor plan to create more open space. We'll have some good examples of that. Adding a dormer. And one thing, they call us control freaks, but we have tried to control every step of the process along the way. In addition to having our own in-house realty, we also have our own in-house construction team. They don't have enough capacity to do all of our rehabs, but particularly when we're doing things like adding a dormer that could get really expensive, we've got a really skilled construction crew that can do that type of thing. Adding a garage, making a basement more functional. And we have a picture to the right here of an example. The good news in our community is that a lot of properties have basements. The bad news is that they sometimes can attract a lot of water and mold and that type of thing. So you can put some money into making the basement dry. And in this case, we made the basement more functional by putting a fully egress window. It's a legal form of egress, which means that you can have living space in the basement. Just trying to be more creative, and doing some simple things like providing a shed for the new homeowners. And we can move on. So I think Jay had mentioned that sometimes, particularly in a smaller home, it can be really difficult to add a bath or even a half bath, but it does significantly improve the marketability of the property. So these were a couple of rehabs that we did. On the left, this was sort of a sitting room, sort of a wasted space, really, that we converted to a half bath. And we doubled up because it had a bit of a scary basement. So we're also going to put the washer and dryer in that room, and that's on the main living floor. On the right, we had much less space to try to squeeze a half bath in, but it doesn't have to be big. As you see, that's a room that we put a pocket door in, so you don't have to allow for the swing of the door. It basically has a toilet, a sink, and that's it. But just having that half bath downstairs makes a big difference in the saleability. What people don't want to do, particularly when they have guests over, is have the guests go all the way upstairs to use the bathroom. So this makes the house much more saleable, without a doubt. And moving on, in the old days, in the middle picture there, you see, and I think Jay had a couple of good examples of this as well, where the way those houses were built, you had separate rooms for everything. You had a separate kitchen, a separate dining room, a separate living room. And really what our buyers want today is this open concept. So take the walls down. Now, of course, you got to know what you're doing. You got to have some architectural plans when you're taking walls down, and you got to have a construction crew that knows how to handle the loads and that type of thing. But this is pretty much what people want, that open floor plan. So we incorporate that into just about every house that we rehab. Having our own construction crew, we've also made good use of adding dormers or just adding living space. Here is a house where as you see, we lifted the entire rear of the house to create a dormer, essentially, that almost doubled the living space of the house. I think on the next slide, you get a sense of the mass of just how much extra living space was added to that house. Is it tremendously cost efficient? No, obviously these types of improvements are expensive, and sometimes you have to use some subsidies when you're doing these types of improvements, because you can't absorb all the costs. Particularly in our market, I think as Marcia mentioned in the beginning, it's been sort of a flat market for housing values. So you do this type of improvement, you don't always get the bang for the buck in the appraised value, but it makes the house much more livable and obviously much easier to sell. In some of our neighborhoods, I think on the next slide, you see a very, very simple, this was a simple shotgun ranch, probably 800 or 900 square feet. And we added a dormer onto the back, which added 2 bedrooms and a full bath to the house. And obviously it sold in no time. So again, we have this issue of appraised values in this community. So this particular house, we had to have a subsidy from the state to help defray some of the cost of rehabilitation. But it worked perfectly, and the home sold immediately. I also wanted to talk about our financing. So in addition to rehabbing properties and making them more livable and then selling them, we also have financing for existing owners. We finance approximately 600 home improvement loans a year. And although many of those improvements are for basic things like fixing a roof or that type of thing, we also do quite a few to do things that we've been talking about, like convert a garage into living space, or to add a garage where somebody didn't have it. This particular year with the COVID crisis, a lot of people have wanted to add a space or an office in their home, and we've provided home improvement loans to do that. And then, of course, modernizing kitchens and baths and adding a deck. And then I did say sort of the plan B associated with that is that we also provide financing for folks to purchase our own properties after the redevelopment. And I think on the next slide, we talk about just some of the challenges. Um, so we are almost always going up against these very low appraised values in our community. So it's not unusual to have a purchase price of 70,000. The house is worth 70. The rehab item is 30. But then the house is only going to appraise even after rehab for $90,000. So we're at 108% loan to value. And that is a very traditional situation that we get ourselves involved in. But really, there's no solution given the market that we're in. And the same could be said of, let's say, an existing owner had that home that was worth about 70,000, but they wanted to add a room and a deck, and it was going to cost $30,000. Well, now they're going over with our home improvement loan over the total value of the property. And again, we're willing to do that where just about any other bank or credit union in town just couldn't do that. We then sell our loans. We service them for a year, and then we sell them to some of our lending partners so that we have the liquidity to try to do this all over again. So just, about to sum up, through innovative development and financing mechanisms, we've been able to improve homes and make them more desirable. The appraised values are an issue, but through some creative financing, we've been able to work around that. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Carrie. That's really amazing. I was telling both Carrie and Jay before we let everyone in how pleased I was to have such practical information on exactly what kind of updates to homes seem to be the ones that are required to attract today's home buyers, and they certainly did that. We have a number of questions. For Jay, can you talk a little bit more about the partnerships with contractors / developers and how they're structured? Do you do it project by project, or do you have more of an MOU partnership?
Sure, no problem. So it is more of an MOU partnership. It is hold on one second. My apologies. It is a MOU partnership, and it is broad-based, and we're really relying upon the partner to help us sort of identify and source the contractors. Or source the properties and develop those scopes, and really drive the whole process for us and on our behalf.
So they come to you with proposals, and then you can either say yes or no.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, and sometimes whether it's through NCST or National Community Stabilization Trust, we'll identify properties, or maybe we have a list from another source, but they also find them as well. And so, but they're the ones that are out there actually walking the properties and coming back with a recommendation on, what the property is worth as is, what the scope is to repair it, and what it would be worth after rehab. And so we're, so it's not an individual contract per property, but these are sort of built on a strong relationship between them and us. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that's such an interesting way to extend your capacity. I think maybe we'll try and actually get back with you and write that up in a little more detail for one of our case studies. Again, this was for, this came in while Jay was talking. You may have answered this before. Do you self-perform your work or contract all of it out? And how about design services? Your rehab costs are very competitive.
So we are not a licensed general contractor, nor are we a real estate brokerage. So all of our services rely upon these sort of partnerships, whether it's an agent or a contractor. We have a lot of skilled team members that are able to sort of monitor and oversee. We walk a lot of the houses, through the process. But our success really is predicated on on our partners doing what we need them to do to help us grow. And it's been an amazing growth and we've only added one staff member as we've doubled our production over the last 4 years. So.
Mm-hmm. And
So that's the pro in doing it this way. The con is, of course, you have less, like to Kerry's point, he talked about them being sort of micro, I don't know if he said micromanagers, but he talked about how they're just very controlling over the process. And there's pros and cons to both sides. I mean, you definitely, I'm sure Kerry are able to control and monitor a lot more closely what's going on, which I'm sure has some benefits as well. So
yeah, I was curious about the design services stuff. You talked about your team, poking around and finding great light fixtures at low costs. Like, let's see, this will be very sexist of me, and I don't know what gender of people you have working for you, but I haven't met very many male rehab guys who can actually go find the perfect light fixture. Do you have a special set of super skills there?
I personally don't. No, I mean, a lot of our rehab partners are good, but I would agree that the average builder is really good at making sure the light fixture is installed correctly, but may not have the design expertise. So I'm not sure who on their teams are doing the work, but I would agree that sometimes when left to their own devices, builders will make poor aesthetic choices. So
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more, and that's why we find it critical as we're developing these work scopes in our Tuesday morning meeting that, and I know, Marcia, you've met Mary Jo, that, she's there as a licensed realtor to talk about the types of light fixtures that we're going to be putting in and that type of thing. Because she's got more of a finger on the pulse of the buyer than the guys who are writing the specs and, kind of just putting it out to bid.
Yeah, so definitely in my experience, I would emphasize that, boy, if you're going to put this much money into a property, you need to find the design experience to put those little touches on, because often they just don't cost that much more, but they can really make an extraordinary difference. I was starting to tell our presenters about a situation where I was in one of the Levitt towns in New Jersey. In other words, it means that there was like 3 housing types and the whole town was built. Every house was one of those 3 housing types. And I was in there trying to figure out why the city, when they had done some acquisition rehab, they weren't able to sell their properties. And I also was able to see the exact same properties done by a private flipper who was good at design. And the difference in price was negligible, but the difference in how the property looked and felt and how attractive it was just beyond words. So it really makes a big difference. Okay. Someone asks, Jay, you made the point about sometimes it's better to just have a 2-bedroom house if it has 2 bathrooms than to have a 3-bedroom house with 1 bathroom. And they ask, what sort of conversations do you need to have with realtors on that? I'm not sure exactly what that means. What did the realtors say?
It's very much in conversation with the agents and really understanding the market in terms of the, what's selling in that area. And so we do really watch carefully, are 3-bedroom, 1-bath homes selling in that market, or is that a rarity? Are 2-bedroom, 2 baths? But in some sort of first ring suburbs, we're seeing that there may be very few sales that are 1-bath houses, but there may be some 2 bedrooms. And so we say, we'd almost rather roll the dice on a 2 and feel like we have a strong property versus that 1-bath. I mean, we had a house recently that was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath, and it took us almost a year to sell it. And we really do think it was that lack of a second bathroom that was the impediment to it.
Okay. For Carrie, could you go into more detail about your CDFI status? And let's see, move this over. And what kind of lending flexibilities does that mean that you have that are different from banks?
And I see the question about, if you're unregulated. And that's why I think it's somewhat folly to say we're unregulated.
Yeah.
All it means is that we're not regulated by a federal agency like NCUA, OCC, FDIC. As a mortgage banker, though, we are regulated by the state of New York. We're not a depository institution, so the regulation is a little bit different. But every loan that we make, we have to report to the state every year, and they, completely vet the terms of every loan that we make. So it's certainly not a predatory situation. We'd lose our exemption if it was. But what we're not held to is, as an example, if you had a house that was worth 70,000 and your mortgage was 68 and you wanted to do a $20,000 improvement, we can provide a home improvement loan to do that, whereas most banks or credit unions would not be able to because they are regulated. So it just kind of gives us a little bit more flexibility to do the things we're supposed to be doing, improving the neighborhoods.
Yeah, and that regulation probably has to do with that banks have is about the risk to their institution, and
Sure.
if they made all of their loans over appraised value, they could be risking the entire institution, whereas you have a lot more flexibility. And while we're at it, maybe Carrie, could you just describe the loan pools that you have used over the years?
Yeah, we try to, we have so many different loan pools, and some of them were funded by NeighborWorks America, and some of them are funded by Community Development Block Grant funds. And because we're a CDFI and banks get CRA credit or Community Reinvestment Act credit for making loans or investments to a CDFI, we've also been able to pull together some private loan pools. That are using private dollars, not public dollars, that of course have a lot more flexibility. And then, Marcia, as you know, in some of these neighborhoods, we've been able to pull together some programs like a 1% program. So you have this person who might be a little bit underwater because of an improvement that they're making, but because we're providing a 1% home improvement loan, they say to themselves, this is my one and only shot to get this improvement done to my home and make it more livable. You just have to have lots of tools in the toolbox and be willing to use those tools very flexibly.
And then Carrie, now I'm starting to think I may not be remembering this correctly, but do you, in your private lender loan pool, is it that different lenders in town make an upfront investment that you then lend from, or is it that you lend and they purchase loans from you?
Both. We have an equity equivalent investment for our lending partners where they get investment credit under CRA, and then they can invest, they can loan directly to a loan pool where they get lending credit. And they get lending credit when we package our loans and sell them wholesale to the bank.
Yeah. It's really something when you have that kind of deep lending capability and can start dealing with capital in a variety of ways. Somebody asks, how accurate are the appraisals? Do you track subsequent sales? To either of you?
Yeah, and one thing I guess that I didn't mention is that once we pick a house on a block, we try not to scatter it too much. If another house becomes available on that block, we'll to the greatest extent possible, we'll try to cluster the activity, and that's when we begin to see that you can actually drive some values. But we're in this community, we're definitely swimming upstream on appraised values, no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Jay?
Yeah, I think Atlanta, our success has been appraised values aren't our problem. Our values are rising. I would say until probably the last year or so, that was both a help in sort of the sales, but not a hindrance to finding affordable buyers. I think we're starting to see pricing rise to a level that's concerning, but it's not an appraisal value issue. So we're seeing growth in most markets. So.
Okay. Let's see. Jay, do you find that virtual staging leads to contracts the same way physical staging does?
We think it's a great way to kind of generate interest when someone sees the multiple listing service listing on the house and they go through the photos with their agent. they're able to kind of get excited because it looks more interesting in the photos than just a plain vanilla room. I would say that we have stayed away from in-person, physical staging due to the cost. I mean, it can cost several $1,000s, and then there's a risk on what happens if things are stolen or damaged. So we've only done that on a couple cases, but it's mostly just due to the expense of it. And so the virtual staging was a way for, a few $100s just to create a pop on the marketing. So.
Okay. Another question for Carrie. How did your organization identify the lending partners who agreed to purchase your rehab loans to take them off your books?
There's really not a lending partner in town that I don't think we've participated with. I think word spreads pretty quickly that I think banks are always looking for CRA credit. And once one of them figures out that if they buy loans from a CDFI, they get sort of automatic lending credit, it spread pretty quickly. And right now we have more folks looking to buy loans than we have loans. I think somebody else asked a very good question about the risk that the banks take, and I think they're accurately getting at the fact that the banks don't want to really take any risk. So they don't buy the loans with recourse because actually our auditors said if they buy it with recourse, it would not really mean that it was on their books, and they don't get CRA credit if the loan is on their books. But what they do is they have us sign a substitution agreement. So if a loan goes into default, we have to substitute it with a performing loan.
Mm-hmm. And I'm aware that, for 25 years, you've built up credibility with these lenders too. So, you might not have been right out of the box able to get those relationships, right, Carrie?
Oh, no, absolutely. It's taken a long time, but I think now you got to start somewhere, but now we really have a great relationship with the lenders in this.
Let's see. Can both presenters comment on if they're aware of and if they support the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act that has been introduced in the House, which for people who don't know what it is, it basically proposes the creation of a tax credit that would help create capital to be used in neighborhoods to cover appraisal gaps.
Yeah, that's a tool that we desperately need in this community. So certainly in favor of that. A lot of times these appraised values are somewhat of a fiction because the low appraised values have to do with bad urban policy or redlining or some condition that the person who owns that property that has a low appraised value had absolutely nothing to do with, and it's totally outside their control. So anything that seeks to level the playing field would certainly be in favor.
I agree with what Carrie said. I think we're definitely seeing that there needs to be more funding sources, more opportunities to increase investment in these types of communities, and also to support more opportunities for minority, African American buyers in our markets. So try to rebalance some of that.
And a couple of people asked, what is NCST, the National Community Stabilization Trust, do, particularly in context that you guys are interacting with them? Can either of you describe who they are?
The National Community Stabilization Trust, as I understand it, was formed probably during the height of the recession, maybe 2009, as a umbrella group to funnel foreclosures. And one of the ways that it supported ANDP over the years is through their first look programs that they had agreements with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and a few others to take foreclosures to nonprofits and other sort of affordable housing buyers first before sending it to market. Carrie, I don't know if you want to add to that at all, but
No, that's it. You know, we had to apply to purchase from NCST, and we sort of get the first look of some of these properties, you know, that are available. They give you very strict timelines as far as you get a couple of days to say you're interested, a couple of days to inspect it, and then um, make a put an offer in where essentially they send out an appraiser and give you a potential cost that you'd purchase the house for. But we've
Okay.
made good use of that tool.
Yeah. And you may have picked up at the beginning that NCST is the sort of the national home for the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative. And one of the reasons, as I understand it, that it made sense to them is that an awful lot of the housing stock that they help transfer between good developer, to good developers, particularly with the lack of subsidy nowadays, the developers need it to be in a neighborhood that has some market. And so those are often middle neighborhoods. So it's really compatible, providing some context to the property development that they're involved in. I think we'll keep asking questions, but I just want to, for those of you who need to take off, just point out that part 2 of this webinar series is on financing strategies, and that is on Tuesday, December 15th at noon. And you will, once you've registered for anything we do, you will definitely hear from us again. So we'll be promoting that. Also, we always like to promote our good partner, Center for Community Progress. And they have a great webinar series, the Cornerstone webinar series. So you always keep track of that. And then if you want to follow up with us, we have a book on the edge, which you can buy on Amazon or get you can read it in its entirety at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco's website. We have a newsletter that comes out every other month. We have a website, middleneighborhoods.org, and there's our mapping tool at the bottom. So I'm going to keep asking questions until Carrie and Jay disappear. Let's see. Oh, the bullet point. I knew this was going to get you, Carrie. Land banks. So not you had a bullet point about avoiding properties held by land banks. I'm sure you meant your land bank in particular. And land bank, I guess the quality of the stock they have varies dramatically from one to the next,
Yeah,
undoubtedly.
in this, no disparagement to land banks intended. It's just in this community, it was the right thing to have a land bank. The land bank took title to 500 or 600 of the worst properties, so that at least somebody was caring for them, mowing the lawns, shoveling the snow, that type of thing. So it's great that we have a land bank, but those properties, by and large, have been vacant for 7 to 10 years. So, they have lead and asbestos and radon. Um, so we're going forward, I think, and we've rehabbed about 80 or 90 of those properties, but they're extremely expensive to do. And I think going forward, the way we're going to be working with our land bank is that as they do demolition of these properties and clear land, we're going to be purchasing the land from the land bank and building new construction.
Mhm.
So it's just the only comment really was about the housing stock that they have. So again, it's a good thing that they own it. So somebody's
Yeah,
caring for it. But by and large, those properties need far more money than we could ever develop, put together to develop.
yeah. I'm certainly no land bank expert, but I have picked up along the way that different land banks have, like, there are people that really advocate that land banks make a point of getting all of this stock, let's say that's in tax foreclosure, not just the worst stock, so that they can balance their portfolios. But in some other communities, they only get the worst stock, which, so what your choices are would depend on where you were.
And the stock here was just bad. It was just,
Yeah,
these were properties that had been ignored by absentee owners for a decade, and then all of a sudden the land bank gets them. So it
yeah,
was certainly understandable.
yeah. So, what about historic preservation and balancing that with what modern what today's home buyers want. Is that ever in conflict, Carrie?
We haven't had that much of a problem. We often, if there is a property that is historic, it has more to do with the outside than the inside.
Mhm.
Uh, the State Historic Preservation Office seldom gives guidelines about what you can't do inside, except maybe replacement windows, that type of thing. Usually more concerned with the treatments on the exterior.
Mhm. Jay, it didn't look like you were working with historic housing stock or housing stock that's old enough to be historic. Is it?
Our housing stock can be older, but there's very few historic neighborhoods here. And since we aren't using a HUD program to renovate them, then we're not bumping into some of those. I would say we do try where possible to try to respect the aesthetics of the neighborhood, but yeah, it's not as regulated as perhaps up north.
Yeah. This one's very interesting. Have either of you ever done any calculation of property tax increases to the county or city as a result of your development?
So we actually did at ANDP 2 studies during the height of the foreclosure crisis. One probably in 2014, and then again in 2017, 2018, in 2 different counties in our metro. And we found in one county, it was for every dollar of rehab, so not acquisition, not soft cost, but in rehab, we found that there was a $6 of increased value to the surrounding homes. Was higher in the other study in a different county. So we did try to kind of quantify how much impact it would have on the surrounding values, and we did find it was there. Relatedly, we also looked at our home buyers, 4 and 5 years later, and found that on average they were seeing 80 and 90,000 in increased wealth just by owning their homes. So I think there's 2 stories there. One is both for the buyer, the increase in wealth, and the other is in the surrounding neighbors in seeing their values rise.
Yeah, sure. We have a question. Could you talk a bit about labor? I am here in the Northeast, and I think that labor and material is our biggest challenge. I don't know if Ian is still with us. Do you mean that the costs are higher in the Northeast? Wouldn't surprise me.
It probably does. Carrie, I mean, you're seeing probably a lot of, a question, are you seeing a lot of union labor?
Well, labor is definitely expensive in this region, and it is becoming more and more difficult to get product because of the COVID crisis. So we have seen just the cost of rehab increase, but what can you do? You just it's a fact of life. So you keep going.
And I think, whoops, somebody asked me for the website of NCST. I think it's stabilizationtrust.org. And then MOU stands for Memorandum of Understanding. Thanks for asking that question, Nick. So it sort of is, in my experience anyway, sort of just lays out, what everybody thinks is going on to make sure you're on the same page about stuff like that, but it doesn't really legally obligate anybody to anything, right, Jay?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think our MOUs spell out the spirit of it, but a lawyer might take concern for us at their simplicity.
Actually, I think I really do want to follow up with you and do a case study, and maybe we can maybe you have a boilerplate for what you start with for an MOU with your developer partners. And let's see, I feel like there was something I skipped. Maybe not. Maybe we're done. I think we might be. So I want to thank our presenters. Both of these people have so many years of experience that you could ask them anything and they would be able to tell you a story about what happened when that happened to them, which is really outstanding. And I know that you'll be able to probably track them down if you have particular questions about that. Thanks to everyone, especially those of you who didn't have another call starting at 11, or I guess it's 1 o'clock on the East Coast, and stuck with us. Please go to our website, middleneighborhoods.org, and sign up at least for our newsletter, and take, for the COP, for the community practice as well would be great. And I guess that's it for now, and we'll see everybody again next month, hopefully.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Thank you. Have a great one.